What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment. My dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, "I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home." And walk out. Most liberating moment of my life. I used to work for a super cunty manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, shit-talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is shittier than ever, and how much this store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you." When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening because it's hot during the day and we have the luck of having a street light right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit, when I realized that it wasn't stuck, but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the street light and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside he made a face and goes, "You can't get me now." I'm inside. In that father-to-daughter done single quote you make a mess tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house." And just fucking let loose with the hose. He was soaked. Worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. Edit. Thanks for all the appreciation. I'm glad my silly story made your day better. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home. We end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company, so we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home, so he drives himself home to find that he has been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside, he shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that, and that I'm just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that, to which she says, "When you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want." So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years, we're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding celebration after the end of the plague. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy and the folks were glum, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in. Prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up, the driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze, appalled, when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She mustn't have heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead, she drew herself up to the full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d' back of the queue. Oof. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment discrimination policy. Empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets, though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." "No, I paid for 8 hours, you'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing." "Right. So anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice, and in all likelihood, we'll no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment." I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June after final marks were given to students but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town, ran a large operation, donated a lot to local sports. Big man in a small town. I had given his kid a mark in the high B range, and so he marched into my office and started off with the "there must be some mistake" line, which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I tell you to" "how much will it cost to get him the?" When I refused the bribe, he went to "you're fired." Not "I'm going to get you fired," but "you're fired, clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. Ended badly. He threatened violence. I reported him to the school admin. He's now banned from the property. "Mister, I pay your salary so you work for me, you lousy piece of shit," was threatened with the cops by Mr. Rondomit. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years, and I'm a supervisor at the local public library, and my former now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me, and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure, our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to a liquidation company. Meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. I was bartending one night and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try to argue with me, saying he has all this money and he tells me when he's done drinking and he's not even drunk. At this point, I'm done trying to be polite and point blank tell him I'm done arguing with him, will not be serving him and his buddies, and he can leave. He looks at me and says, "Now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink?" I look him dead in the eye and say, "The fucking bartender, now it's time for you to go." The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule, don't piss off your bartender. New director. Decides admin should hold a meeting at noon MF in the nurses' lunchroom and bar them from entering during that time. Defines it in a group text as a quick win. My response: please help me to understand how this is beneficial to remove the nurses from their lunchroom during lunch break. No response, his peers and higher-ups in on the text. He is then moved to the quality department. Screwed up in so many levels. I grew up with my parents having screaming arguments over every little thing. They do love each other. Over 50 years of marriage so far testifies to that, and it always upset me. A couple of days ago, they popped into my house to visit for a coffee on their way to stay with friends a few miles away. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other. I took great pleasure in telling them that I would not stand for such behavior in my house, and, if they didn't lower their voices, they could stand outside until they learned some manners. The meek apologies tasted so sweet. As did the coffee. My dad called me after I moved out to inform me that the lawn was getting pretty long and needed to be mowed. "So?" I asked. "Well, just because you don't live here anymore doesn't mean it's not your responsibility," he said. "Yes it does," I said, and hung up on him. When I was still a child, I saw how abusive my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They are forced to accept the abuse and swallow their pride, knowing that they are still indebted to them and have nowhere to go. Once they have enough money to leave my grandparents, they moved to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berate my dad for living in such a shanty house and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they start blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad and how she poisons him into moving to a new home. My dad wasn't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. I personally had one that I'm quite proud of. I was one of 2 mechanics responsible for an annual inspection on a Piper Arrow fixed-wing prop aircraft. Aside from dismal compression ratios and some odds and ends in the aircraft that could be overlooked by technically, there was a problem with the main landing gear motor. The down and lock cycle for that aircraft is required by the OM, and by extension federal law, to be 30 seconds or less across one cycle of the motor. This plane's gear requires 3 to 5 cycles across about 2 minutes to achieve down lock. I told the owner, who was a famously sleazy lawyer, that he can't fly his plane and I won't sign off the annual until the main landing gear are fixed. The lawyer told me to sign off the annual and he'll get to fixing the gear some other time. When I said no, he proceeded to threaten my job and demanded to have the plane back so he could get another mechanic to sign it off as airworthy. I laughed in his face, impounded his aircraft and notified the FAA. The man eventually gave his aircraft to my business I was working for at the time by way of title lien in order to pay off the massive hangar fees he racked up from his plane sitting in my shop. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I used to work at a few subways. Thing is, the owner inherited them when she already had a busy and lucrative career elsewhere. She mainly held on to them to employ immigrant family members, I think. One time, she was in the back when she heard me interact with an angry customer. Afterward, she came out and said, "You know you don't have to take shit like that. I trust you, you can use your judgment and just toss anybody out who talks to you like that." After that I wouldn't take any shit from anybody. Slightest hint of backtalk to your sandwich artist, and you were out on your ass, still hungry. It was so much fun. Let me speak to your manager. No. Get out. I'm going to call and complain. Oh, I'm terrified. Go nuts, but you can't call from in here, because you're trespassing now. The sheer indignance of an entitled customer when you don't bow and scrape before them is really something to behold. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants. Which, in and of itself, is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him, and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the fuck he was doing here. He started in on me again, and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the old hand on his back point to the door universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. I worked at the Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was a dick. He would insult everybody working there and force us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later, me and him got transferred to another Walmart that was just built, and they needed to pick a manager and assistant manager. Some random got manager, but I got assistant manager, I guess. All the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day he was ordering the other cashiers around, then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same shit around, he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. So my uncle is a deputy sheriff, and one time he was at an airport talking to my aunt over the phone in Spanish. Once he got done with his call, some nearby Karen that overheard him went up to him and started demanding to see his green card. Uncle has an accent too, so you can tell he wasn't born in the US. Uncle decides to fuck with her and tells her he doesn't know what a green card is and has never heard of one. She gets more pissed and keeps demanding to see it. He messes with her some more, then eventually he goes, "Well, I don't got a green card, but I got this," then takes out his wallet and shows her his badge. She immediately walked away while my uncle laughed his ass off. A co-worker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this bitch sales vice president that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs. And she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class, and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin.